The Divine Dissimulation by Martin Lundqvist. Chapter 1. The year 2785. 1.1 Introduction. Abraham Goldstein was looking out through the windows of the 3,000 meters high Goldstein Tower built in the center of Antarctica. The Goldstein Tower was the second largest structure on Earth built in a pyramid shape to support its tremendous weight and to make the building secure from attacks and prevent it from collapsing under its weight. From the top of Goldstein Tower, Abraham Goldstein could see all of his domains, the lush farmlands, the vast, serene parks, and the residential complexes where his loyal followers lived. Abraham sighed. In spite of owning all of this, he was not satisfied. He wanted to own more, and be stronger. At the age of 250 years, he hoped that his DNA was possible to regenerate once more so that he would feel like a young man again. As the DNA regeneration technology had only been around for a couple of hundred years, and at his age he was on the fringes of it. Regardless of what he did, death might be crawling closer. Abraham exhaled and relaxed. Tomorrow would be a great day, and if age hadn't done him in by 250, he would probably survive another day. The reason Abraham was excited for the morning was that of the reports from his science laboratory that the Divine Detection program was ready to be launched. He had specially ordered his team of scientist staff that he was to be the first person to use the new technology, and hopefully it would answer all of his questions about the gods and make him meet his divine being. The Divine Detection program was the latest marvel of quantum physics and a secret project of House Goldstein. It essentially scanned through every dimension possible, and if it managed to find the divine dimension, it could transport the consciousness of the person plugged into that dimension so he could meet the divine beings while still being alive. Wanting to meet the divinity fresh, mentally and physically, Abraham entered the sleeping pod in his bedroom, set it for 4 hours, which was twice his daily sleep allowance, and instantly fell asleep. 1.2 The Solar System in 2785. In 2785, most of the solar system was inhabited, with Mars being the major population center with 4 billion inhabitants. Earth, in turn, had only 1 billion inhabitants who were living their life in abundance, as almost all of the wealth and ownership in the solar system was centered on Terrans, which was the common denomination for humans living on Earth. The background to the limited population on Earth was that the ruling Terran Council in the 23rd century had decreed that everyone who was not rich enough or had good enough genes were to be sterilized or deported to Mars. A lot of people had opted to be sterilized and live out their lives peacefully, while others had left Earth. Since the 24th century, of the population of Earth had been stabilized around 1 billion, which the Terran Council had determined was the ideal population to avoid civil conflict and resource shortfall. In 2785, every birth and death on Earth were tightly regulated, and no natural births occurred. Instead, every citizen was allowed to apply to have a child, and through scientific DNA selection, every individual was granted the best possible outcome from his or her parental source genetic material. Individuals who were rich could usually apply to have more than one child, while poor people and people with undesired genetics were to leave the planet if they wanted offspring. Different measures also controlled the climate on Earth. The climate was controlled through launching large mirrors and shades orbiting Earth. The mirrors increased the amount of solar energy on the surface, making cold areas such as Antarctica warmer, while the shades decreased the amount of sunshine, making the surface cooler, such as in tropical areas. The global sea level had fallen with over 100 meters due to the water being transported to the other planets to make these planets livable, and also from the water used for fusion power. Fusion power was the most important energy source on Earth and the solar system. And as a consequence, one of the biggest problems was the oversaturation of oxygen around power plants, as the fusion of the hydrogen in water left excessive amounts of oxygen in the air. The oxygen level in the air around the fusion power plants was in some cases almost 100%, so it was highly dangerous to live close to them, as such high oxygen levels made humans delirious and sick. Technically, the planet Earth was still divided into different countries, but since long they had lost their meaning as all the political and economic powers with the major company conglomerates enterprises. The company conglomerates governed Earth via the Terran Council, which consisted of House Goldstein that ruled Antarctica, Australia, and South America, House White that ruled North America, House Muller that ruled Europe, House Rashid that ruled the Middle East and Africa, and House Chang that ruled most of the Asian continent. Through the Planetary Council, they convened and made sure that life on Earth was plentiful and peaceful. There had been peace on Earth through the Pax Terran Agreement for 300 years. Outside of Earth, however, their houses were always fighting through supporting different sides in proxy wars on other planets, where the wars on Mars were the most violent ones. All the major population centers on Earth connected to a network of trains that operated in vacuum tubes and could reach a speed of 10,000 kilometers an hour. This way, all the major cities could reach each other within an hour or two. Mars in 2785 was a chaotic place short of resources and full of warring factions. When the planet was terraformed 500 years earlier, it had never been meant for more than 200 million people. And now, 500 years later, it stood at 20 times that amount. The excessive population meant that the water and other natural resources were always in short supply, and the only thing that seemed to exist in abundance were weapons and synthetic drugs. In spite of its imperfections, many of the Martians still loved the Martian lifestyle. On Mars, people could still love whom they wanted, have children when they wanted, and party when wanted, while everything was tightly regulated on Earth. Freedom came at a price, though, as the life expectancy on Mars was only 40 years, while it was 150 years on Earth. Abraham Goldstein, who was 250 years old, was the oldest man on Earth, as he was a wealthy man who could get his team of scientists to prolong and extend his life a lot longer than most people. Worth mentioning is that life on Mars could have been a lot better if the Terran Council had not feared the Martian way of life so much, and it intentionally kept the planet weak. The terms of trade between the planets were extremely imbalanced, where the houses of the Terran Council took whatever they wanted from Mars by paying next to nothing. This was done either by the Terran Council supporting the planetary wars on Mars by supplying weaponry to their preferred factions, or by simply intimidating the Martians with the superior Terran technology, and creating mayhem and chaos when the Martians dared to resist. No export of Terran technology to Mars was allowed, so essentially most of Martians only had access to 500-year-old technology that was way behind the technology of the Terrans. If the Terran Council had wanted to, they could have given Mars a proper and safe atmosphere, saving its inhabitants from the toxic amount of stellar background radiation that they have received, and the lack of food ration, oxygen, and appropriate nutrients. But instead, these resources were spent on having a massive Terran military fleet circling Mars to show the Martians that they were the masters of the solar system. The different circumstances had evolved humans differently on the different planets. The people on Earth were all picture perfect due to the genetic preselection. Depending on the culture, they could be athletic or lean, but in all cultures they had perfect complexion and perfect posture. They were highly intelligent humanoids, but also highly obedient and non-questioning. The inferior humans on Mars, on the other hand, all had different genetic malfunction and defects from actinic radiation and genetic mutation. They had hunchbacks, pale, crumpled skin, bad breath, and a high likelihood for artificial drug addictions. On the flip side, they were radiation, virus, and infection resistant, and a lot more resilient than the Terran counterparts, even though they eventually died from sickness and hunger when the circumstances got too rough. It was said on Mars that the pompous and arrogant Terrans wouldn't last a week on Mars living a Martian life, a statement that was probably correct. Because of their radiation resistance, Martians were employed to do a dangerous job in the solar system, such as building and maintaining the automated mining stations on Jupiter's moons and terraforming asteroids for Terran holiday resorts. A lot of them smuggled Terran technology back to Mars, so the expeditions hiring Martians were never allowed to run on newest technology due to the paranoia of the planetary councils. The Terran militants were always watching strictly under force control and to ensure that the Martians are doing their dangerous work all for the benefits of Earth Council's money and power. Among other inhabited places in the solar system, Venus was only used as a mining and penal colony with a very limited population. The population was limited because the volcanoes of Venus regularly spewed out more toxins than lava, so all attempts to terraform had failed. Instead, Venus was only used for its automated natural elemental resource mines and prison camps handled by Terran militants, where condemned prisoners of misbehaving Martians and captured ex-rebels lived in endless darkness and suffering. Life expectancy for anyone living on Venus was less than 15 years. Likewise, Mercury was too close to the Sun to terraform for humanoid settlements properly. Many of the asteroids were used by wealthy Terrans as holiday houses, as technology existed that could put them in any selected orbit around the Sun, with artificial atmosphere and artificial gravity. A lot of asteroids also circled Earth in this manner, as view of Earth was the latest in fashion for wealthy Terrans. Finally, a few planets orbiting other stars had human colonies. While the technology existed to travel this far, the houses of Earth did not see it as a viable investment. The fastest travel speed possible with the technology of the time was 1 out of 10th of the speed of light, which meant that it took at least 40 years to reach Alpha Centauri b, the closest star. While it was possible to travel this far by cryogenically freezing the crew before the trip, it was simply not profitable to do so, as it was impossible to control the inhabitants of colonies on Alpha Centauri, as it took 4 years to send them a message and 40 years to travel there. However, a few colonies had been set up outside of the solar system. These colonies had been founded by eccentric trillionaires with no heirs and no better use for their money. All of these colonies were completely independent and had very limited contact with Earth. 1.3 The Divine Suicide and Ascension Plan. Abraham Goldstein woke up 4 hours later full of energy. He took the elevator 800 levels down to a top-secret research lab 300 meters below ground. It was so secret that not even his own family knew about it. Due to its enormous expense, he had to create a fake project elsewhere to explain the costs. He met up with Jack Brown, lead scientist for the project whom he had snatched from House White, with an offer he couldn't refuse. This created a diplomatic crisis between the House Goldstein and House White, but it had been worth getting expertise from the outside, as the in-house science team was more likely to betray him to one of his family members than outsiders would. Abraham Goldstein said, "Is the machine ready?" Jack Brown says, "Yes, it should be operational now. But I must warn you though, as per your instruction, we haven't tested the device yet and it might be dangerous." Abraham Goldstein said, "And you're not going to check the machine for that matter. I'm not spending 80 billion Terran credits on a scientist's toy. This is my toy." The 80 billion Terran credits devoted to the Divine Detector machine was an absolute fortune. The construction of the entire 3,000 meters high Goldstein Tower had cost 120 billion Terran credits, and that was an 800-level building with 16,000 rooms. The reason the Divine Detector was so expensive was that it was connected to a massive particle accelerator spanning over 5 kilometers underground, and also because it used a lot of rare and hard-to-get materials. To keep the project safe from prying relatives, Abraham had also been forced to buy the rare materials from the black market. Regardless, as he had money, he could afford it. Jack Brown says, "Understood, sir. We have scanned the entire spectra of dimensions, and we believe that the one you're looking for is located at coordinates gamma, omega, delta, 1985. Abraham Goldstein said, "Excellent. Plug me in." Jack Brown says, "Okay, I'll keep you in the divine dimension for less than a second due to your safety. You'll probably experience it as a lot longer, as we predict that time moves very slowly in there." Jack Brown started the Divine Detector, and immediately Abraham Goldstein could feel that his consciousness left his body. He was traveling through space at speed faster than light. Abraham could see how he was passing by the photons, which light consists of. In a glimpse, he crashed down in an open courtyard. Abraham had mixed feelings as he stood up in the courtyard. It was so beautiful and so eerie at the same time. He looked down in a pond full of lotus flowers. In the reflection of the pond, he could see the Goldstein Tower below, as if he was on a floating structure high up in the sky. Abraham almost got completely paralyzed by the fascination of watching his creation from this new angle, but he snapped out of it. He was here with a purpose, to meet God. He saw a big gate at the end of the courtyard, and his gut feeling told him it was the right way. He walked through the gate, and he entered a throne room. Now at the far end of this room was a golden throne full of gemstones. It reflected the sunlight more intensely than Abraham had ever seen before. After marveling at its beauty for a while, he looked below the throne. There was a dead man in robes, lying on the ground face down. Abraham approached the lifeless body and turned it around. He looked at it in awe. The corpse belonged to Yahweh and the God of his people, the God of his dreams that he knew of. But Yahweh was dead? How could this be? After the initial shock, he knew that he would have to find a reason behind all of this for sanity of his mind. He started searching the clothes of the dead deity, and he managed to find a letter. Although it was written in ancient letters, and an ancient language he could not comprehend, Abraham instinctively understood the meaning of the message. The letter said, "This is how I end my life, a knife to the throat. I thought that being the sole ruler of humanity was all I ever wanted. I thought it so much, so I expelled the other divines from my realm. The only one I allowed to stay was Lucifer, my best friend and lover. One day, however, I got jealous on Lucifer as well and killed him. I was now the only divine left. Being the sole ruler is not a life to live. I am constantly lonely and battling with guilt and my demons. Humanity does not need me anymore, and I don't feel to need to live either. This is my end. Yours truly, Yahweh." P.S. Since you are reading this, humanity obviously needs a God after all. Take my place, go to the left altar of my throne, and you'll know how. Abraham stepped up and walked to the altar. What he saw baffled and fascinated him. On the altar, he saw a blueprint for 3 different microchips. At the top chip was the God chip. It allowed the user to connect with and communicate with up to 10 million followers. It also enabled the user to directly control the actions of anyone with an angel chip implanted. The middle chip was the angel chip. It allowed whoever having it inserted to connect with up to 100 followers at the time. The bottom chip was the human chip. It made it possible for gods and angels to enter the mind of anyone having the chip implanted in their brain and communicates with them. In contrast to the angel chip, the human chip did not allow the god to control the human's actions directly. The god chip also had the feature that the one wearing it could instantaneously kill anyone with an angel or human chip implanted. He instantly memorized the schematics. The world then blurred in front of his eyes, and before he knew it, he was back in the research lab of Goldstein Tower. Jack Brown approached Abraham as he came back to consciousness. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Abraham Goldstein said, "No, but I found something else. Can you extract 3 microchip schematics from my memory?" Jack Brown says, "Yes, wait a second. Yes, I got them. Do you know what they are?" Abraham Goldstein says, "Yes, but it is none of your business. All I need to know is, can you make them?" Jack Brown says, "Yes, with our particle replicator machine, we can replicate any item we have a blueprint of, including those schematics." Abraham Goldstein says, "Good. I want 1 microchip of the top schematic plan and 300 microchips of the bottom plan. None of the middle ones for now. Have them done by tomorrow. And make sure this stays between us for your family's sake. Don't tell anyone." Jack Brown says, "Yes, sir. Consider it done, sir." Abraham Goldstein left the room and Jack Brown sighed. He felt a strange feeling gripping him. Although he was an agnostic, humans should not try to reach the divine realm nonetheless. What was that story with the microchips his boss asked him to make? What happened after Abraham was being connected to the machine for just a few seconds? Jack Brown had never seen any microchips like these schematics before, and he could only speculate what they would do. Regardless, he would do as Abraham ordered him and produce the batch. He owed Abraham that and his life. A decade earlier, Jack Brown had done the unthinkable and fallen in love with a Martian woman during a house-wide research expedition on Mars. When Benjamin White, the director of the Mars expedition, had found out about the love affair, he condemned Jack Brown's entire research team, consisting of 16 researchers in total, and revoked their Terran citizenships. He did this because the House White was the most racist of the elitist Terran houses. They were showing their power by publicly shaming and deporting a group of prominent researchers for the crime of one of them falling in love with a Martian. This showed their people on Earth that it was not okay for anyone to have a relation with Martians, regardless of how important you are. Unfortunately for Benjamin White, his move to banish House White's foremost quantum physics scientist over a race matter was not appreciated by his peers, and he was assassinated during a board meeting later that year. By that time, however, no trace of the team was to be found, and it took House White years to see that the Abraham Goldstein had hired Jack Brown with his team personally. Fortunately for Jack Brown and his staff, Abraham Goldstein was more pragmatic than racist, and had contacted the team promising the team safe re-entry to Earth as well as new Terran citizenships at the end of their contracts if they choose to become faithful to him. He even promised Jack Brown that he was allowed to have children with his Martian women, and that both she and the children would be granted Terran citizenships by Abraham Goldstein personally when the project finished. With no time to waste, Jack Brown gathered his team to start making the microchips requested by Abraham. It would be a difficult task, but luckily they were all experts at using the particle replicator machine, and they had access to every element possible at their disposal. 1.4 Abraham Goldstein is reflecting and making new plans. Abraham Goldstein was sitting in his penthouse reflecting over the event that happened the day before. He had very mixed feelings about the occurrence. On the one hand, it was damn shame that Yahweh was dead, as he had so much respect for him and wanted to learn everything there was to learn from the great Creator. On the other hand, this had opened up the opportunity for him to reach his ultimate goal, to be immortal, to be a god. This was after all his destiny. It wasn't chance that led him to the divine dimension. It was providence. Yahweh, as the all-seeing God, had appointed him to be his successor, and it was his duty to comply with this. But first of all, he had to find out whether the divine microchip worked. The God version of the chip was big and bulky, as it needed to be able to communicate with up to 10 million worshippers at once. To protect it, Abraham had ordered Jack Brown to forge it into a golden crown. Abraham put on the crown and screamed of the pain as the chip in the crown merged into his brain and the crown was stuck into place. A young and beautiful female servant came rushing in. Servant says, "Are you okay, sir? I heard a loud scream." Abraham Goldstein says, "I have never been better." Servant says, "That's excellent, sir. May I ask about the golden crown? I have never seen you wear it before. It is the most beautiful thing I saw in this entire universe." Abraham Goldstein says, "You are not paid to ask questions. Be gone." Abraham clenched his teeth in frustration after the servant had left. He had used to be sleeping with his servants all the time when he was younger and more virile. He still wanted to keep up the illusion that he was sleeping with his servants, so he kept hiring young and beautiful girls to be his sides. The truth was that he had not had sex with anyone for at least 100 years. He simply could not feel physical attraction anymore. The researchers behind the DNA regeneration technology had told him that this was a common side effect of the technology and that many people could not feel sexual attraction at all after the natural lifespan of their genes ended. Abraham thought of his former wife, Lillian Goldstein, who had been dead for 130 years. She had refused DNA regeneration technology, claiming that if God had wanted her to live longer, he would have given her genes that would last longer. And artificially extending one's life would lead to misery. He had mourned her passing and had simply not been able to connect properly with anyone since. Hence he was very lonely. Abraham got back to the matter at hand. The divine golden crown on his head had given him an excruciating headache, but had not given him any divine clarity and thoughtful supernormal insights into the realities of the world. He realized that the purpose of the golden crown had never been to provide deeper knowledge, but merely to control the subjects below him. Indeed, the human chip for the followers below him needed to be tested, and luckily a good candidate had appeared. A suspected spy from House Chang had been caught earlier in the day. While there was a legal system in place, this was rarely applied to spies, as the de jure system stated that torture was not allowed and that the suspect was innocent until proven guilty. None of the houses were keen to give spies a fair trial and risk to lose them and valuable information, so the de facto way of treating spies was to detain them without a record, try to break them down through torture, and extract whatever information possible. Regardless if someone was found to be a spy or not, they were then killed. Spies were murdered to avoid them to return with information to their employer, and innocents were killed to avoid having them report what happened to the local non-corporate authorities. The latter was not an issue for House Goldstein. This was the reason that House Goldstein was the richest and mightiest faction. While the competitors had to pretend to pay taxes and follow the local laws, Goldstein's headquarters in their own nation saved them this hassle. With no time to waste, Goldstein took the elevator down to another basement level of Goldstein Tower, where the Abraham Goldstein's counter-espionage department was located. 1.5 A successful test. Wilfred Chang was terrified. His right leg was broken, his left arm had burns, and his left leg had frostbites. He was well aware that he would never see his family again, and all he could hope for was a swift death. To his bitterness, the worst part was that he was completely innocent of the allegations. He had come to negotiate a trade deal for a minor independent Chinese company. Before he had got that far, though, masked men had grabbed him and tied him up and blindfolded him to transport him to this dark room. Unbeknownst to Wilfred Chang, he had been set up by an agent from House Mullah who was sent to spy on the upcoming annual general meeting of House Goldstein. The House Mullah agent did this as he reckoned that the best way not to be detected was to focus the attention elsewhere. Collateral damage was just a part of covert warfare after all. Wilfred Chang looked up. To his big surprise, he saw a very familiar face in front of him, the face of Abraham Goldstein. Wilfred Chang was baffled. He could never have imagined that the leader of a house personally came down to oversee the torture of a prisoner. What information could they possibly think he had? And why on earth was Abraham Goldstein wearing a golden crown on his head? No one did that. Suddenly, Abraham signaled to the guards to hold Wilfred while he pressed something into his ear. Then they all left the room without saying a word. In the next room, observing Wilfred, Abraham Goldstein felt a great joy. The chip had melted into Wilfred's brain and merged with the brainstem. The technology was working. He could feel what Wilfred was feeling. He could see what Wilfred was seeing, and he could read his mind. Apparently, poor Wilfred wasn't a spy after all, just an innocent man petrified of his imminent death, and never being able to see his family again. "Oh well, I can sort you out," Abraham thought, and started transmitting to Wilfred. Abraham Goldstein as a voice in Wilfred's head. Wilfred, can you hear me? This is God. I can show you the path out of here." Wilfred Chang screaming out loud. What? What the fuck is this? What are you doing to me?" Abraham Goldstein says, "Don't question. Just believe and follow the path." Wilfred Chang resigned. "Okay, God, please show me the path." Abraham says, "Good, you'll be rewarded. You'll see your family again, and the pain will be gone." Abraham then induced a hallucination in the brain of Wilfred Chang, where he thought he was back home with his family and the pain was gone. It didn't last for long though, as Abraham got distracted when the amazed Black Ops operatives talked among themselves. Black Ops 1 says, "What the heck is happening? What is he doing?" Black Ops 2, "I have no idea." Abraham Goldstein says, "Don't worry, gentlemen. Everything is working exactly as it should. This man is innocent. You'll keep him locked up, alive, and unhurt, until I personally instruct you otherwise. Make sure he gets medical attention immediately. I don't want him dead." Abraham Goldstein left the level, and the flabbergasted Black Ops operatives sat quietly in the room for a long time, trying to figure out what just happened. Chapter 1.6. More test subjects are required. Abraham Goldstein was back at his penthouse in Goldstein Tower. He marveled over the day's successful technology test. The technology he had found was a pure divine inspiration and not imagination nor insanity, which of course was options he couldn't reasonably rule out before. Given that divine technology worked, that would imply that everything else he had experienced was also genuine and not a product of his imagination. An issue he had thankfully noticed during the tests earlier in the day was that he had to focus his entire mind to control the mind of one person below him. As soon as he got distracted, he lost the connection, and the power over the test subject's mind was lost. While controlling the mind of one individual at the time was useful, it hardly made him a divine being. So he had to step up his performance, as the divine chip was meant to be able to control up to 10,000 people at the same time. The first step would be to connect more test subjects. Abraham was thinking of getting his Black Ops team to acquire new subjects, but we realized there was a much easier way. His female assistants had a clause in their contracts that they were to satisfy his sexual desires if requested. Although Abraham was sure they were all happy that he hadn't made use of that clause, it was now time to use it and give them the time of their lives at the same time. He had 8 female assistants hired in total, and this evening Jenny Lundberg from Northern Europe was the one on duty. He called her on the intercom, asking her to come over in a sexy dress. A bit later she arrived in the room, She seemed anxious and reluctant. She had been hired for over 3 years, and Abraham had during the time never used any sexual innuendo at all. Asking her to come in late at night wearing a sexy dress was completely different from his usual self. The Abraham she knew liked to spend hours reading ancient tomes or some other boring things, which were perfectly natural, as he was 220 years older than her after all. Abraham Goldstein says, "Hello, Jenny. I have called you over tonight so you can honor Clause 6.6 of your employment contract." Jenny Lundqvist speaking nervously. I don't know what that means. I haven't read the contract since I started. Abraham Goldstein says, "It means that you and I are going to have sex tonight. Come here, I don't like asking twice." Jenny stood petrified and did not know what to do. Abraham decided that he did not have time to wait, so he walked up to her and pressed the human chip into her ear. She felt a sharp pain, but soon forgot about the pain as she became head over heel aroused. The next 25 minutes, she had sex that was out of this world with the oldest man on the planet. Or at least that's what Jenny thought. In reality, Abraham was sitting on a couch with an excellent scotch watching her hallucinate while controlling her hallucination. Although he, for the first time in 100 years, felt some sexual arousal, he chose not to act on it. His body was an old vessel with not much time left. It would be unwise to risk losing his future immortality trying to please something that was going to disappear soon anyway. Chapter 1.7 Back to the Divine Dimension. A few days later, Abraham Goldstein was back down on the basement level where the divine detector was located. He had managed to chip 6 out of 8 assistants. The last 2 had stormed off when he requested sex and mentioned a contract. It wasn't a big deal. He would just have to fire them, and if they were to complain somewhere about his behavior, he would simply show the world their signed contracts, and that would be the end of it. The purpose of his trip back to the divine dimension was to see if he could control multiple subjects from there at the same time. An hour in the divine dimension was equivalent to a second in the real world, so with a bit of luck, he would be able to control several subjects at the same time without losing connection. He had arranged so that all his 6 assistants would be at the spa room of his penthouse level. They would all get an experience out of this world today. He quickly connected to each of them, and yes, they were all waiting for him in the spa. Good girls, he thought and smiled. Jack Brown and few of his team members walked in. Jack approached Abraham. Jack Brown says, "I brought some more people today. 20 minutes in there is a hell of a long time. Would be equivalent to 50 days in that dimension if what you're saying is correct." Abraham says, "So I get 50 days from 20 minutes. That sounds like an absolutely excellent way to extend my life." Jack Brown says, "There is one more problem. The immense amount of energy that the machine is using." Abraham says, "Yes, I got your memo. I have ordered all non-essential production to shut down for the next 30 minutes. Jack Brown says, "Oh, a lot of people will complain." Abraham says, "No doubt, but that's my problem and not yours. I don't have time for more questions. Start the machine." A brief moment later, he arrived in the divine dimension. he decided to take a seat under a lotus tree and test if he could connect with all of the subjects at once. He could. The feeling was even more immense than just taking over a single subject. Before, he had felt like a master, but now he actually felt like a god. He invoked himself and his subjects into an orgasmic trance. He could feel how days and nights passed by as he was engulfed by the transcendent feelings of spirituality and desire. In no time at all, he was back in the Divine Detector lab. Jack Brown says, "You look blissful." Abraham Goldstein says, "Yes. Turn on all the production again. I don't want my whiny grandson to whine more than necessary about losing money." Chapter 1.8 CEO Meeting with Jake Goldstein. Jake Goldstein was furious. He had called and requested an explanation from his grandfather Abraham Goldstein as to why all the production had been stopped earlier during the day. Abraham had nonchalantly told him that he was welcome to swing by his office if he wanted to talk. As Jake had arrived at the elevator, there had been a message on it saying that the elevator was turned off to save power, but Jake was more than welcome to walk up. As Jake's office was located 20 levels below Abraham's penthouse, it was a lot of stairs to climb. Though Jake Goldstein was 190 years old and second oldest member of the family, he resembled his grandfather in having almost relentless energy, especially when angered. Huffing and puffing and close to a heart attack, he finally reached the top level of Goldstein Tower. Abraham Goldstein was sitting in the spa with one of his assistants and flanked by several of his guards. Abraham Goldstein greeted his grandson arrogantly. "Greetings, grandson. You don't look too well. Did you have a nice walk?" After a while, Jake Goldstein finally caught his breath. "You fucking bastard! You made me walk up 20 levels. Abraham Goldstein says, "Yes, exercise is good for you. And besides, I reckoned we needed to save power to get our production up." Jake Goldstein says, "Ha ha, very funny. Now tell me why on earth you turned off production for half an hour. Do you even realize how expensive that is?" Abraham says, "Is this trivia time? Very well. I turned off the power to the production because I needed extra power for my secret research project. It cost us roughly 1.2 million Terran credits per minute to turn production off on Antarctica. So I would say around 36 million for the half an hour." Jake Goldstein says, "What is our secret research project? Shouldn't I, the CEO, know what is costing us all of this money? We are losing money for the first time in company history." Abraham Goldstein says, "Dear grandson, you are the CEO only because you are my oldest living descendant, and I can't be bothered with day-to-day operations anymore. Our secret research program had made a significant breakthrough, and I will disclose it all to you at the annual general meeting next week. I'm turning on the elevator for you to save your legs. Guards, show Jake to the elevator, please." After Jake Goldstein had left the penthouse, Abraham Goldstein told his female assistants and security guards to leave him alone. He preferred to be alone most of the time, as it made him feel like he could let himself go deeper into his thoughts, without unnecessary distractions. He had felt compelled to give Jake Goldstein a display, though, as he hated when people below him thought they could question him. Abraham Goldstein was not particularly fond of any of his descendants and extended family members, and there were a lot of them. As Abraham had lived for 250 years, he had 10 generations below him, although he had lost track after the first 4 generations. As the Goldsteins were the wealthiest family in the world, they all qualified to have the maximum number of children, and all of these generations in turn had spouses and partners. In total, the living members of Abraham's extended family amounted to almost 300 individuals. And sadly, the only ones Abraham had liked was his wife Lillian and his children, and they had all died of age and sickness. Chapter 1.9 Annual General Meeting, Goldstein Holdings. Abraham Goldstein was sitting on the golden throne of the divine dimension meditating. He had been unsure of what to do with the eternal corpse of Yahweh, but he had decided that the best course of action at the moment was to hide it out of sight at the moment, as it was unsettling to have it plain sight. Abraham was waiting for the annual general meeting of Goldstein Holdings to commence. The 300 largest shareholders, mostly various family members, were expected to come for the proceedings, which were held in the main auditorium of the Goldstein Tower. Abraham Goldstein had a surprise for them. The days before the meeting, he had ordered his private security forces and black operations team to attach a divine chip to everyone's head secretly. This had been done nighttime after spraying in a sleep-inducing gas in the rooms of the delegates. As the gas used to put the delegates to sleep also had sedative properties, hopefully no one had noticed the pain associated with when the chip merged with the brainstem, while they were peacefully asleep. For the first time since Abraham had found the divine dimension, he had felt annoyed. Since a second in the real world was equivalent to an hour in the divine dimension, it was not an easy time waiting for the last struggles to get into the meeting. Abraham felt that he had been waiting for weeks, and this was angering him more than he knew it should. Eventually, everyone had arrived, and Abraham Goldstein made a unique entry as the divine mass hallucination. Abraham Goldstein appearing to speak from a stage in auditorium. Welcome to the 2785 AD Annual General Meeting of Goldstein Holdings. I'm going to be brief. You have been complaining about the inflated research budget these last few years. The research project has been a great success, and I'm now speaking to you all directly from the divine dimension. Abraham Goldstein waited for a reaction from the crowd. Eventually, Jake Goldstein rose up. Divine dimension? What the hell is that? So you're saying that you are sitting in another room and what we see on the stage is a hologram? Essentially, you spent 80 billion Terran credits on improved hologram technology? Abraham Goldstein says, narrow-minded fool. You are indeed experiencing new technology, but definitely nothing simplistic as hologram technology. You are experiencing divine technology, given to me personally by the divine providence. Jake Goldstein, turning towards the crowd. Jake Goldstein, turning towards the crowd. As you can clearly hear, Abraham has completely lost it. I suggest we appoint a new chairman at once, and then postpone the rest of this meeting. A loud murmuring broke out among the delegates, and they started screaming and arguing with each other. Abraham Goldstein got them back into silence with a deafening roar. Enough! Jake, the scripture says you should obey your elders. You have broken this rule. You shall suffer. Abraham Goldstein clapped his hand and Jay Goldstein fell dead to the ground with a brain hemorrhage, as the divine chip had ruptured the brain stem. A long silence of shock entered the room before a few delegates ran up to Jay Goldstein and tried to resuscitate him, but to no avail. Abraham Goldstein spoke again. "It's pointless. He is dead, and more of you will follow if you don't immediately bow down to me, your new god." Upon hearing this, Joseph Goldstein, a seventh-generation descendant and a religious man, swallowed his fear and stood up. "This is blasphemy. You are no god. You are just a tyrant and a murderer. There is only one God, Yahweh, and anyone who says otherwise is not a real Goldstein." Burning with anger, Abraham Goldstein caught Joseph in his gaze. He roared out to the auditorium, "Yahweh is no more, for I have seen the throne of God, and it is empty. Now bow down to me or suffer." Joseph Goldstein says, "I will never bow to you, you monster. You may take my life, but you will never take my soul. You burn forever in hell for your crimes." Abraham Goldstein says, "Very well, so be it." Abraham Goldstein clapped his hand, and Joseph Goldstein also fell dead to the ground. Abraham Goldstein raised his hand to signal to the petrified delegates in front of him to be silent, and then continued his speech. "I came here today with peaceful intentions. I came here with kind thoughts on how to improve our cause. But you defied me. Now more of you will suffer. Lisa Goldstein, you weren't happy with the money we paid you, so you stole from us. Death to you. Aaron Goldstein, in spite of me personally marrying you to a beautiful woman, your heart longs for a man. Death to you. Chris Goldstein, you fornicated with your brother's wife, Margaret Goldstein. Death to both of you." Abraham Goldstein clapped his hand, and as all these people mentioned fell dead to the ground, he continued, "I am your new god, and the rest of you are spared if you immediately bow before me." Everyone in the room immediately threw themselves into the ground, bending to Abraham. Happy with this, Abraham Goldstein continued, "Good, you are spared for now, but beware, I can see your every thought, and if you ever consider moving against me, your death is certain. My fifth-generation grandson, Isaac Goldstein, will be now the new CEO of the company, while I will occupy myself with my divine matters. Moving forward, the company will aim to assist my divine matters and not lining your pockets. Hence, all the profit will now go to my goals and not to your dividends. Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm leaving now, but I will be watching you." After finalizing his speech, Abraham disconnected from all of his followers and disappeared from the room. After the initial confusion had settled, medics were called into the meeting hall, but they could not do anything to save the victims. Chapter 1.10 Intelligence Report Sent to House Mullah. This report is covering some severe internal conflict in House Goldstein that it is imperative that our leaders are aware of before the upcoming Terran Council meeting. There has been a lot of speculation in regards to how the gigantic research and development budget of House Goldstein is actually spent. According to our resources, even the senior members of House Goldstein are unaware of how the money is spent, which has been a cause of internal strife between CEO Jay Goldstein and a majority owner and founder Abraham Goldstein. According to the official financial report of Goldstein Holdings, The total research and development spending for this fiscal year is 100 billion Terran credits, which is 5 times the R&D budget of House Mullah, and essentially is driving House Goldstein into losing money. As we failed to get accreditation to this year's annual general meeting, we flew in several microscopic drones to film and capture the meeting this way. A bizarre chain of events unfolds. The meeting minutes stated that Abraham Goldstein was going to give an opening speech, but he was nowhere to be found. After a long wait, mass psychosis broke out among the delegates, who started screaming towards the empty stage. During this time, several of the delegates, among them the CEO J. Goldstein, also fell dead to the ground. Eventually, the mass psychosis ended, medics were called in, and the meeting ended. As one can guess, the official story is that the meeting at House Goldstein took place, that there was a consensus to maintain the high R&D spending, and that Isaac Goldstein now took over as the CEO as Jake Goldstein is retiring. None of the deaths that occurred at the meeting had been confirmed by House Goldstein or any independent sources. I recommend allocating more resources on surveillance of House Goldstein. Regardless, if in-house faction wars or external enemies caused the disturbance, a significant sign of instability in one of the great houses is not good for the balance of power, and might affect our and Terran Council's interests in a detrimental way. This report is signed by Otto von Bauer, Senior Intelligence Analyst of House Mullah. Chapter 1.11. Abraham Goldstein reflects on how to move forward. Abraham Goldstein was watching the sunrise in his massive 50 hectares private garden. The sunrise and the sunset of Antarctica were two of the greatest moments of the year for him. As Goldstein Tower was located on the South Pole, the sun rose at the spring equinox on the 23rd of September, stayed up for 6 months, and set at the autumn equinox on the 21st of March. Abraham Goldstein loved to see the natural sunlight again, opposite to the artificial one he had to settle for during the winter season. 150 years back before the Goldsteins had colonized Antarctica, they had launched several large orbiting satellites with mirrors to reflect sunlight down to the Antarctic surface, to make it inhabitable with comfortable climate, averaging 18 degrees during the winter and 27 degrees during the summer. By changing the angle of the mirrors, they could decide how much sunlight should reach the surface, effectively affecting the local climate. The sunlight reaching Earth from the mirrors did not look like the sun, though, but rather resembled several very luminous stars. During the summer, the satellites were still reflecting down sunlight to the surface, as the Antarctic sun was not strong enough to give the desired temperature. Abraham Goldstein felt uneasy and could not enjoy the annual sunrise as much as he normally did. He had made himself a lot of enemies, and the only thing that kept them from striking was that they thought that he knew every move they took. As a matter of fact, he didn't. In his physical human form, he could only connect with one person at a time, and that took a tremendous amount of focus, stopping him from doing anything else. The park itself had also lost most of its beauty to Abraham. As it's due to threat level against him, it more resembled now a military checkpoint rather than a place filled with serenity and peace. Abraham Goldstein was reflecting on how to move forth. He knew that regardless of external enemies or not, his physical use was soon to end, and he needed to be in the divine dimension by that time. The best way to stay permanently in the divine dimension would be to keep the divine detector running with him, connected to it, while he at the same time had his body cryogenically frozen to avoid dying from natural causes. But he realized in retrospect that he had moved too fast. there was simply not enough electricity available to keep both the production facilities and his divine detector machine running at the same time. If the production wasn't running, he could not keep the citizens content, and the vast majority of them did not have a chip implanted into them yet, and had nothing to fear from his divine power. In case there was a public uprising against him, no one would support him, and he would most certainly perish without achieving his goal. Abraham Goldstein was contemplating whether he had moved a year too early for his project or not. Not having enough electricity to run both the divine detector and the production facilities was a massive oversight. Then again, when he initiated the divine detector project, the aim had been originally to visit God and learn everything there was from him, and then being able to die in peace. Little had he known in advance that God was already dead, and Abraham was meant for something far bigger, to be the new divine. In order to get enough power for both the production facilities and to keep the divine detector running, the most straightforward solution for Abraham would be to acquire a few more fusion reactors. This solution could be implemented in a year and was definitely achievable. It was also deeply unsatisfying. What he would effectively get from this solution would be an extended life where he kept ruling his business empire through pure intimidation of the family members under the control. On the other hand, he knows that they would not worship him, and eventually they would find a way to overthrow and kill him. What Abraham Goldstein wanted was to find people that feared him and worshipped him like a god. Such people had been easier to find in the dawn of the human era, when science and technology were less prevalent than mysticism and superstition. But the extensive experiments in time travel during the 26th century had conclusively proven that time travel was practically and theoretically impossible. But what if he could use mind wipe technology to completely erase the memories of a group of people and then have them to wake up on a terraformed planet which resembled the promised land and with the divine chip implanted? They would no doubt act like ancient humans did when they first reached a level of self-awareness. And with his divine direction, they would act like the first of his people, although better, as he would have a stronger grip on them than Yahweh ever had. The next issue would be to decide on how and where the promised land would be. He could not make it on earth, as his people eventually would wander off, noticing the advanced civilization of other humans around, and realize that there was no way humanity had only been created a short while ago. Awareness of technology was the bane of any divine being. The more technologically advanced people became, the more scientific and smarter they were, and the less need they had for a god to answer for the mysteries of the world. Ideally, he would find a planet on another solar system for his plan, although this also carried difficulties. Most alien planets required advanced technology to be livable for humans. Unless absolute fortunes were spent, they could not terraform to a degree where humans with only ancient technology could live and thrive. Abraham Goldstein was well aware that completely terraforming a planet in another solar system was well beyond his reach. For a moment, he sighed from resignation. But then another idea struck him. What about an asteroid? Several asteroids with artificial gravity and atmosphere generators were orbiting Earth as luxurious residences for some of the other faction leaders. What if he could do something similar, but further away in the asteroid belt? All the technology to transform an asteroid into the promised land was available, such as putting fusion thrusters on the bottom of the asteroid, making it rotate, and would create the gravity. A nanotechnology photon shield generator could be used to stop the atmosphere from dissipating out in space. Refining oxygen from iron and silica oxides could also create the oxygen required. Electrifying the iron core of the asteroid would create a magnetic field to protect the inhabitants from dangerous background radiation. Satellites with large mirrors would reflect enough sunlight down to the comet's surface to make it warm, similar to what Goldstein had done in the Antarctica 150 years earlier. The asteroid would need to contain frozen water to start with to save costs, as it was far too costly to transport all of the water needed from Earth. Once the surface temperature would rise, the water would then become a liquid state, and it would dissipate and then come down as rain, just as on Earth. Feeling extremely inspired, I started looking through the asteroid database. Abraham trying to find the impeccable rock for his divine ambitions. After a while, he found it, B528A, measuring 22,072 square kilometers, exactly the same size as the Promised Land. It was orbited by B528b, which measured 100 square kilometers, where he can set up his base of operations headquarters. The only problem with B528A and B528b was that they were both co-owned by the Houses of Earth through the Terran Council. Regardless of this, he was convinced that he would be able to trade their part of the ownership to him personally. After all, for most people, B528A and B528b were just barren rocks floating through space, but for him, there was something else. For him, they were destiny. Chapter 1.12 Pre-Meeting Minutes Terran Council October Summit 2785. Dear Council members, this letter will outline the issues that will be handled on our October Terran Council meeting held at European Towers in Halmstad. Please make sure to discuss the issues at hand with your respective faction in advance to ensure our meeting is swift and productive. The noted down solutions are just suggestions from the different factions, and we will work hard and productively to find a solution that the Council can agree on. Issue 1. The Tingle Dominion. The Tingle Dominion is a faction on Mars controlling 10,000 square kilometers of land area and roughly 3 million inhabitants. More importantly, they manage a gadolinium mine, which is an essential element for certain fission reactions. A couple of months ago, a conflict occurred between the Tingle Dominion and an envoy from House White. As the Tingles were not happy with the price offered for the ore, they held the messenger at gunpoint and forced him to mine it himself without proper safety equipment. As a result, the envoy got sick and died of his condition before he could make it back to Earth and get good care. Suggested actions. House White. Massive bombardment of Tingle Dominion from orbit to send every Martian a message to not mess with us Terrans. House Rashid. Sponsor members of another faction in the area to conduct a terrorist action in the Tingle Dominion. House Cheng. See solution to the next issue. House Mullah. Condemn Tingle Dominion publicly but take no further action at the moment. House Goldstein. Gadolinium is too important. Pay them what they want for now while looking for another supplier. Assassinate Tingle leaders as soon as the opportunity arises. Issue 2. The Martian Overpopulation. When Mars was first colonized, it was estimated that the ideal population of the planet would be around 200 million. Today, the population is estimated to over 4 billion. This leads to a huge unemployment, social strife, and poverty on the planet. This affects our trade with Mars, as they sometimes cannot honor the business deals they make due to war and civil unrest. There is also a massive issue with refugees from all of the Martian wars trying to get to Earth, costing large sums of money to redirect and to detain. Terran Human Rights Group help the Martians to a better life through a massive support package, improving the atmosphere and planet conditions, making the planet sustainable for 4 billion inhabitants. House Goldstein and House Rashid do nothing. Losing some shipments is cheaper and more efficient than intervening in the Martian wars. The life of everyday Martians is not our problem, but an issue for their local governments. House White, destroy any unauthorized shuttle approaching Earth. This is cheaper than detention and sends the Martian message that trying to get to Earth without authorization equals certain death. House Mullah, spray the Martian atmosphere with chemicals that lower human fertility. If they have stopped breeding, we can then help them. House Cheng, introduce fast-breeding rats with bubonic plague in the Tengil Dominion. This will make them and the rest of Mars dependent on medical shipments from Earth. If the Martians agree, then we can set the price as high as we want to secure beneficial trade agreements for years to come. If they don't agree, we don't send any medical shipments from Earth, and then Mars will be heavily depopulated and would reach a population level closer to what is sustainable. Issue 3. Revoking the AI limiter on military robots. A large proportion of the Terran planetary forces consist of military robots of different forms and shapes. These robots are strong enough to pacify any war zone throughout the solar system. However, they are in practicality a lot less useful. Now, this is because of a 500-year-old law that is essentially restricting artificial intelligence from becoming self-aware. Lifting this restriction, we would then no longer need to commit any actual Terran or Earth humans to go to Mars to handle conflicts and wars throughout the solar system. This can save money, lives, and suffering. The Terran pacifist movement. The main reason behind the wars and uprisings are the massive inequality of wealth across the solar system. Now cut down the military spending and try to battle poverty and injustice instead of adding new